The air in the vast room, previously heavy with silence, now felt thin, almost unbreathable. Kim Ji-woo felt the weight of Lee Jin-woo's gaze upon her, a look that pierced her soul, stripping her of any shred of dignity. The CEO's words, "It seems you have a new position," echoed in her mind like a funeral bell, a premonition of a fate she could never have imagined. What position was this? Her heart pounded, a frantic drum threatening to explode in her chest. The mansion, once a workplace where she was invisible, now loomed as an impenetrable fortress, and she, a newly condemned prisoner. Min-jun, oblivious to the storm brewing, still clung to Ji-woo's leg, his small face turned up in a smile of pure innocence. For him, the world was simple. The kind woman who had offered him a cookie was now his mother. This childish purity was the only light amidst the darkness engulfing Ji-woo, but also the anchor pulling her to the bottom of a sea of despair. How could she disappoint that hopeful gaze? And how could she accept what seemed like madness? Lee Jin-woo, the man of ice, observed the scene with calculated coldness, though a vein pulsed slightly in his temple, betraying his internal tension. He had made his declaration, and in his world once spoken, a word was law. There was no turning back. The humiliation he felt was deep, but his son's pride and the need to keep his word were stronger. He could not allow the world to see his son as capricious, nor himself as a man who did not honor his decisions. What society would think was secondary to his own integrity, however twisted by his relentless logic. "You will be Min-jun's mother," Jin-woo finally declared, his voice low but laden with an authority that brooked no questioning. It was not a request, it was an order. "You will move in here. You will receive everything you need. In return, you will care for Min-jun and fulfill the role of lady of this house." Ji-woo felt the air escape her lungs. To be Min-jun's mother? The lady of the Lee mansion? The idea was so absurd, so far removed from her reality, that it seemed like a nightmare from which she would wake at any moment. Her tear-filled eyes met Jin-woo's, searching for a sign that he was joking, that this was a cruel trick. But there was nothing but steely determination in his gaze. "Sir, CEO Lee," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "I can't. I'm just a cleaner. I don't have the education for this. I don't have the social standing. And my grandmother, she needs me." The mention of her ailing grandmother brought a pang of pain to Ji-woo's chest. It was for her that she worked tirelessly, for her that she endured daily humiliation. How could she abandon her? How could she fit into a world that was not hers, a world of luxury and power that she barely dared to touch? Jin-woo raised an eyebrow, a gesture that for him was one of disdain, but for Ji-woo, terrifying. "Your grandmother will be well cared for, the best doctors, the best treatment, everything will be provided. As for your social standing and education, that can be remedied. You will learn. And if you don't learn, you will be instructed." He paused, his steel eyes fixed on hers. "There is no I can't, Kim Ji-woo. My son chose you, and Min-jun's choice is final. You accept, or the consequences for you and your family will be unpleasant." The veiled yet undeniable threat chilled Ji-woo's blood. The consequences. She knew what that meant for someone in her position. The Lee family was an empire, and unpleasant coming from them could mean the loss of her job, the impossibility of getting another complete ruin, and her grandmother. The promise of medical treatment, though born of a threat, was something she could not ignore. Her grandmother was all she had. Min-jun, sensing the tension, squeezed Ji-woo's hand tighter, looking up at her with those big, innocent eyes. "Oma," he whispered, the word mother sounding like both a melody and a curse in Ji-woo's ears. The word Oma from Min-jun's mouth was the final blow. Ji-woo felt tears well up, but held them back with monumental effort. She was trapped. Trapped in a web of gold and ice, with no way out. That small being who had chosen her for her kindness was now her involuntary tormentor, her only weakness. I accept, she whispered, her voice choked, her head bowed in surrender. The phrase came out as a lament, a farewell to her simple life, to her freedom, to her own identity. She was no longer Kim Ji-woo, the cleaner. She was now a piece in a high society chess game, a pawn forced to become a queen without knowing the rules or the price. An almost imperceptible sigh escaped Jin-woo's lips. It wasn't relief, but confirmation that his will would be done. He nodded to one of the security guards waiting discreetly at the door. Take Mrs. Kim Ji-woo to her new quarters, prepare everything she needs, and inform the staff about the new lady of the house, Mrs. Kim Ji-woo. The words sounded strange, alien. Ji-woo felt a shiver. That title, which once belonged to the CEO's late wife, was now hers, an imposter. The security guard approached, his expression inscrutable, but his eyes seemed to carry a hint of surprise. Min-jun let go of Ji-woo's leg and ran to her, hugging her tightly. "Oma!" he exclaimed, radiant. Ji-woo knelt, embracing the boy, feeling the warmth of his body. In that moment, amidst the chaos and despair, there was a small flame of affection, a glimpse of why she was doing this. But fear still dominated her. She looked at Jin-woo, who observed the scene with an expression she couldn't decipher. Was it satisfaction, resignation, or just the cold calculation of a man who always got what he wanted, no matter the cost? As the security guard led her out of the room, Ji-woo cast a last glance at the cleaning cloth that still lay on the marble floor, a symbol of her past life, now irremediably lost. She was entering a new world, a world of luxury and privilege, but also of crushing expectations and an even deeper solitude. The cold Lee mansion was not her prison. It was her destiny, and the nightmare was just beginning. The corridor stretched ahead of Kim Ji-woo, a tunnel of polished marble and soft lights. But to her, it seemed to lead directly into an abyss. Each step of the security guard in front of her echoed like a hammer striking her head, while the newly acquired title, Mrs. Kim Ji-woo, reverberated in her mind, strange and heavy. She, the invisible cleaner, was now the lady of the house. The irony was cruel, the reality surreal. Her eyes, still brimming with tears, swept over the luxurious details she had previously ignored in her daily tasks: authentic Ming vases, Persian tapestries, oil paintings by renowned artists. All of this, once merely part of the backdrop of her work, was now the stage for her new forced existence. A bubble of cold, thin air seemed to envelop her, isolating her from any remnant of her former life. The security guard stopped before an imposing door carved from dark wood and opened it with a formal gesture. "Your quarters, Mrs. Kim," he announced, his voice neutral. But Ji-woo felt the weight of curiosity and judgment in his gaze. As she entered, the air seemed to suck the breath from her. It wasn't a room, it was an entire suite, larger than her small apartment. A king-size bed dominated the center, covered in silk and velvet. There was an adjacent living room with soft sofas, an elegant desk, and a panoramic view of the mansion's meticulously maintained gardens. The bathroom, visible through a half-open door, was a sanctuary of marble and mirrors, with a bathtub that looked like a private pool. Ji-woo felt like an intruder, an imposter. Her hands, calloused from work, seemed dirty in contrast to the immaculate purity of the environment. She touched the silk comforter, feeling its softness beneath her fingers, and a wave of nausea hit her. How could she, Kim Ji-woo, the cleaner, sleep in a place like this, live in a place like this? A young maid, dressed in an impeccable uniform, waited in the corner of the room, her head slightly bowed. "Welcome, Mrs. Kim," she said, her voice polite, but her eyes, meeting Jiwoo's, carried a mixture of surprise and distrust. CEO Lee asked me to inform you that a complete wardrobe has been provided for you, and Mrs. Choi, the housekeeper, will come shortly to explain your new routine and responsibilities. New routine, new responsibilities. The words were a chilling reminder of her sentence. Jiwoo merely nodded, unable to utter a word. Her throat was tight, her thoughts in a whirlwind. She needed her grandmother. She needed the simplicity of her life, the familiarity of her small home. As the maid withdrew, Jiwoo walked to the window, watching the sun set over the vast lawns. The beauty was undeniable, but the feeling of imprisonment was overwhelming. She was in a golden cage, a bird that didn't know how to fly in such a vast sky. Minutes later, the door opened again, and a middle-aged woman, with a serious demeanor and impeccable posture, entered. It was Mrs. Choi, the head housekeeper, a figure respected and feared by all the mansion's staff. Her eyes, sharp and evaluative, swept over Jiwoo from head to toe, and the cleaner felt naked under that scrutiny. "Mrs. Kim Jiwoo," the housekeeper began, her voice formal and emotionless. "CEO Lee has entrusted me with your adaptation. From today, you are the lady of this house and Minjun's mother. Your responsibilities include overseeing the young master's education, managing household affairs, and above all, maintaining the Lee family's image." Jiwoo swallowed hard. "My image? But I don't know anything about that." Mrs. Choi raised an eyebrow. "That is why you will be instructed. There will be lessons in etiquette, art history, finance, and everything a lady of Korean high society needs to know. A stylist will come tomorrow morning to tailor your wardrobe. Your hair and makeup will also be handled by professionals. You are no longer Cleaner Kim Jiwoo. You are Mrs. Lee, and you will act as such." The mention of Mrs. Lee made Jiwoo's stomach churn. It was a title that didn't belong to her, a mantle she could never wear with dignity. And my grandmother?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper, the only hope amidst the despair. Mrs. Choi's expression softened minimally, a brief flicker of something that might have been compassion. "CEO Lee has already arranged everything. Your grandmother has been transferred to Seoul University Hospital in the VIP ward. The best doctors are caring for her, and all expenses will be covered by the Lee family. You may visit her, but in moderation, so as not to arouse suspicion." A bittersweet relief flooded Jiwoo. Her grandmother was safe, well cared for. It was the only reason she wouldn't flee at that instant. But the condition, not to arouse suspicion, was another invisible chain. Your salary as a cleaner will be deposited into your account, and a new monthly stipend will be added for your personal expenses as lady of the house, the housekeeper continued, listing the terms as if reading a contract. "But remember, Mrs. Kim, your stay here depends solely on young Master Minjun's happiness and your ability to fulfill your role flawlessly. Any slip-up, any insubordination, and the consequences for you and your family will be severe, not just for you, but also for those who depend on you." The threat, though veiled, was clear. Jiwoo felt a shiver run down her spine. She was under constant surveillance, a puppet in Lee Jinwoo's hands. The housekeeper, with a final penetrating look, withdrew, leaving Jiwoo alone in the suffocating opulence of her new home. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the silk slip beneath her fingers. The silence of the suite was deafening, filled only by the echo of her own heartbeats. She closed her eyes, trying to cling to the memory of her simple life, but it already seemed distant, a faded dream. Somewhere in the mansion, Lee Jinwoo was in his office, looking out at the starry night. In his hand, a glass of whiskey. His expression was impenetrable. He had solved Minjun's problem, ensured his son's peace. The cost? A cleaner in his house, a lie to the world. He felt no remorse, only the cold satisfaction of a man who always controlled his destiny. But for a brief moment, his eyes strayed to the photograph of his late wife on the desk. Would she approve of this charade? He pushed the thought away, a mere annoyance. His decision was made, and now Kim Ji-woo would have to adapt, whether she wanted to or not. The game had begun, and Ji-woo, the most improbable piece, was about to discover how cruel it could be. The silence of the suite was a cruel melody, each note a reminder of the golden cage in which Kim Ji-woo had been imprisoned. The silk beneath her fingers on the edge of the king-size bed seemed mocking, too soft, too luxurious for her calloused hands. She felt like a fish out of water. No, a fish in a crystal aquarium, observed, exposed, but unable to swim freely. Moonlight filtered through the wide windows, illuminating the room with an ethereal glow that, instead of calming her, heightened her sense of unreality. She tried to lie down, but the too soft mattress seemed to swallow her, and the lavender scent of the sheets was strange, not the familiar aroma of cheap soap and dust from her own apartment. Her eyes wandered over the high ceiling, the gilded frames, the crystal chandeliers that sparkled like distant stars. Every detail screamed wealth, a world she had only cleaned, never inhabited. How could she, Kim Ji-woo the cleaner, sleep here? How could she pretend this was her place? Mrs. Choi's words echoed in her mind. You are no longer cleaner Kim Ji-woo. You are Mrs. Lee, and you will act as such. The weight of that name, the legacy of a woman she never knew, but whose shadow hung over every corner of the mansion, was overwhelming. She closed her eyes, seeking the image of her grandmother, the only safe harbor in her storm. Knowing her grandmother was safe in the VIP ward was the only thread preventing her from collapsing, the only anchor in her sea of despair. But the condition, not to arouse suspicion, was a sword of Damocles hanging over her grandmother's head and hers. The night dragged on, an eternity of insomnia and anguish. Ji-woo couldn't sleep. She got up, walked to the window, watching the sleeping gardens, the distant city lights. It was as if she were on a stage, and the world outside, her old life, was the audience, awaiting her performance. But she was not an actress. She was just a simple woman, forced into a role she didn't understand. Dawn brought not relief, but a new wave of anxiety. Barely had the sun begun to peek over the horizon when the door to her suite was opened by a young maid, followed by a small army of professionals. A stylist with a portfolio of fabrics and sketches, a makeup artist with a case full of brushes and colors, and a hairdresser with an arsenal of products and tools. Mrs. Choi stood at the front, her expression serious, her eyes sharp. "Good morning, Mrs. Kim," the housekeeper said, her voice without inflection. "It's time to begin your transformation." Ji-woo felt a shiver. Transformation. The word sounded like a sentence. She was led to an upholstered chair in front of a full-length mirror. The stylist, an elegant man with a professional smile, began to measure her body, to hold expensive fabrics against her skin, to murmur about silhouettes and trends. The makeup artist analyzed her face with an almost scientific intensity, while the hairdresser examined her hair, previously tied in a simple, practical bun. "Your hair is strong, but it needs a cut that enhances your face," the hairdresser said, his fingers running through her strands. "And the color. We can add a little warmth, a subtle shine." Ji-woo watched her reflection, a stranger in the mirror. Her simple cleaner's clothes had been replaced by a silk robe, but the essence of who she was still there, beneath it all. She felt a pang of pain seeing the cleaning cloth in her mind, the symbol of her identity, now so distant. Hours passed in a blur of touches, smells, and instructions. Her hair was washed, cut, and styled into soft waves that framed her face. The makeup artist worked with artistic precision, enhancing her eyes, softening her features, transforming her into a more polished, almost unrecognizable version of herself. The stylist presented a series of outfits, each more elegant and sophisticated than the last. Silk dresses, tailored suits, delicate jewelry that sparkled under the light. "This is a dress for breakfast," the stylist explained, holding up a navy silk ensemble. "And this for social gatherings, and this for gala evenings." Ji-woo tried on each piece, feeling the fabric glide over her skin, the weight of the jewelry on her neck. She felt like a doll, dressed and arranged for a role. When she finally saw herself in the mirror, in an elegant dress, her hair perfectly styled and impeccable makeup, she barely recognized herself. The woman in the mirror was beautiful, sophisticated, but she was not Kim Ji-woo. She was Mrs. Lee, a carefully constructed facade. Mrs. Choi nodded with approval. "Excellent. Now let's go to breakfast. Young Master Min Jun will be waiting." Min Jun's name brought a small ray of light amidst the darkness. He was the reason, the only reason. Ji-woo followed the housekeeper through the corridors, each step more confident in her new slippers, but her heart pounded. She was about to face Lee Jin-woo again, and the world he had created for her. In the dining room, Min Jun was sitting at the table, a small smile lighting up his face upon seeing her. "Oma!" he exclaimed, running to hug her. The boy's embrace was the only genuine touch she had received in days, a reminder of why she was enduring all of this. Jin-woo sat at the head of the table, reading a financial newspaper. He looked up when Ji-woo entered, and his eyes swept over her new appearance. There was no surprise, no admiration, only a cold, calculating assessment. It was the look of a man who saw his piece on the chessboard finally in position. "Good morning, Mrs. Kim," he said, his voice monotonous. "I hope you had a pleasant night." The irony of the question made Ji-woo's stomach churn. Pleasant? She had spent the night in a private hell. "Yes, CEO Lee," she replied, her voice firmer than she expected. Min Jun pulled her hand, leading her to the chair beside him. "Oma, you look beautiful." The boy's compliment was a balm, but also a burden. She was not beautiful. She was an illusion. Breakfast proceeded in a tense silence, broken only by the clinking of cutlery and Min Jun's few words. Ji-woo felt Jin-woo's eyes on her, a constant presence, evaluating every movement, every expression. She was under scrutiny, and she knew that any flaw would be noticed. After breakfast, Mrs. Choi led her to the library, where piles of books on etiquette, art history, and finance awaited her. "Your lessons will begin this afternoon, Mrs. Kim," the housekeeper informed her. "And tonight there will be a dinner with some of CEO Lee's business partners. It will be your first public appearance as the new lady of the house. Do not dare to fail." The threat was clear, the pressure overwhelming. Ji-woo looked at the books, at the world she was forced to learn, and felt a lump in her throat. She was drowning in a sea of expectations, and the current was too strong. Lee Jin-woo in his office watched the library scene through security cameras. He saw Ji-woo, the new Mrs. Lee, sitting, small and lost, amidst the vastness of her new role. A slight, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. The transformation had begun, and he, the master of the game, was satisfied. Kim Ji-woo's fate was sealed, and the nightmare was only just beginning to unfold. The smell of aged paper and fine leather in the library was a stark contrast to the aroma of disinfectant and wax that Ji-woo knew so well. She sat in a velvet armchair, a heavy volume on social etiquette resting in her lap, untouched. The words danced before her, meaningless, while her mind stubbornly revisited the image of the woman in the mirror. That wasn't her. It was a luxury doll, a mannequin dressed and made up for a purpose that crushed her. Mrs. Choi had made it clear there was no time for lamentations. Every hour a new tutor arrived, showering Ji-woo with a deluge of information. art history, global economics, the intricate codes of conduct of Korean high society. Her head throbbed. She, who had always prided herself on her practical intelligence, on her ability to solve everyday problems, now felt illiterate in a world of scholars. Every phrase about the importance of impeccable savoir-faire or the genealogy of an influential family was a painful reminder of her own humble origins. She tried to absorb, tried to memorize, but the information seemed to slip through her fingers like sand. How could she, who had spent her life cleaning the dust from others' mansions, suddenly understand the complexity of mergers and acquisitions negotiations? Despair began to set in, a cold knot in her stomach. She looked out the window, wishing for the freedom of a fresh breeze, the familiar sound of city traffic, the simplicity of a life where the biggest worries were paying the rent and ensuring her grandmother's well-being. Min-jun at times appeared, a ray of sunshine in her golden prison. He snuggled beside her, showing her colorful drawings or telling her about his day at school. In those moments, Ji-woo felt a genuine warmth, a connection that was the only real thing in her new existence. But even these moments were tinged with artificiality. She was Oma, but an Oma who didn't know how to cook her son's favorite dishes, who didn't know his friends, who had no shared memories of his growth. It was a charade, and with each affectionate Oma from Min-jun, the weight of the lie seemed to increase. As the afternoon wore on, the pressure for that evening's dinner intensified. Mrs. Choi returned, accompanied again by the stylist, makeup artist and hairdresser. This time, the choice of dress was even more crucial. A long, midnight blue silk dress, embroidered with delicate silver threads, was presented. The accompanying jewels, a sapphire necklace and dangling earrings, sparkled with a splendor Ji-woo never imagined touching. "This is a highly important business dinner, Mrs. Kim," Mrs. Choi instructed, her voice a chilling whisper. "Everyone's eyes will be on you. Every gesture, every word will be evaluated. CEO Lee tolerates no imperfections." Ji-woo felt the weight of the dress, the sparkle of the jewels, like shackles. She was a blank canvas, and they were painting the perfect image of Mrs. Lee. Her hair was again styled, her makeup applied with even greater precision, transforming her into a figure of cold elegance. In the mirror, the woman staring back was stunning, but her eyes, behind the layer of mascara and shadow, carried a deep melancholy. When the time came, Ji-woo descended the mansion's grand staircase, each step feeling like a descent into the abyss. The dining hall was lit, and the guests' voices echoed, a murmur of polite conversations and restrained laughter. Lee Jin-woo stood by the fireplace, talking with a group of men in dark suits. He turned as she entered, and his eyes, cold and calculating, scrutinized her from head to toe. There was not a hint of surprise or admiration, only silent approval, as if checking if his investment had been worthwhile. "Mrs. Lee," he said, his voice resonating in the hall, "allow me to introduce my wife, Kim Ji-woo." The word wife sounded strange, almost obscene, coming from his lips. Ji-woo felt a shiver. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and made a slight bow as she had been taught. The guests greeted her with a mixture of curiosity and respect, their eyes scrutinizing her, trying to unravel the mystery of the new Mrs. Lee. She could feel the whispers, the unspoken questions. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? During dinner, Ji-woo sat beside Jin-woo, feeling his gaze on her with every forkful, every sip of wine. She struggled to remember the guests' names, the rules of etiquette, the conversations about investments and markets that seemed so distant from her reality. She responded with short, polite phrases, trying not to make any mistakes. Every movement was calculated, every word pondered. She was an actress in her greatest performance, and the stage was the luxurious dining hall, the audience, the most powerful people in Korea, and the director, Lee Jin-woo. At one point, one of the guests, an older businessman with a shrewd smile, asked about her passion for art. Ji-woo felt panic. She had no passion for art, except perhaps for the vibrant graffiti she saw on the streets of her old neighborhood. She remembered one of the afternoon's lessons about the importance of modern Korean art. "I appreciate the audacity of contemporary art, especially works that challenge conventions," she replied, her voice a little more strained than desired. She felt Jin-woo's gaze intensify. He was testing her. The businessman nodded, a glint of interest in his eyes. "Ah, yes, an interesting perspective. And which artist in particular captivates you?" Ji-woo swallowed hard. She couldn't remember any names. Her mind was blank. For a second, the silence seemed deafening. She felt cold sweat trickle down her back. Then, an image of a painting she had seen in a book, an abstract artist with vibrant colors, came to mind. "Kim Hwang-ki," she said, the name sounding strange in her mouth. "His ability to express the essence of Korean beauty through abstraction is inspiring." The businessman smiled. "An excellent choice, Mrs. Lee. I see you have refined taste." Ji-woo felt immense relief, almost fainting. She had passed the test by a hair's breadth. Jin-woo beside her expressed nothing, but a slight, almost imperceptible squeeze of her hand under the table was the only indication that he had noticed her small moment of panic and her recovery. It was a warning, a reminder that he was always watching, always controlling. The night dragged on, an elegant torture. When the last guest finally departed, Ji-woo felt her legs weaken. She climbed the stairs, exhausted, the weight of the dress and jewels seeming unbearable. In the suite, she shed the expensive clothes and makeup, feeling as if she were removing a heavy mask. She looked at herself in the mirror. The pale, tired woman staring back was Kim Ji-woo again. But a Ji-woo scarred by battle. She had survived her first public appearance, but the cost was high. The mirror reflected not only her image, but the golden cage in which she was trapped, each bar made of silk, sapphires, and crushing expectations. In his office, Lee Jin-woo watched the night through the window. He had seen Ji-woo's performance. She had done well, surprisingly well for a cleaner. The small slip with the artist, the quick recovery. He had noticed everything. A cold, satisfied smile touched his lips. The piece on the board was adapting. The game was only just beginning, and he, the master, was in control. Kim Ji-woo's nightmare had only gained a new and more terrifying chapter. The silence of the suite was a balm and a torture. Ji-woo threw the midnight blue silk dress over an armchair, the fabric slipping like a second skin she yearned to shed. The jewels, cold and heavy, were placed in their velvet box, each sapphire a chilling eye watching her. In the mirror, the pale, scarred woman was a ghost of herself. The makeup, once a mask of perfection, now looked like smeared war paint, revealing the exhaustion behind the facade. She had survived. By a hair's breadth, the memory of the name Kim Hwang-ki still echoed in her mind, a thin thread that saved her from the abyss of embarrassment. A momentary relief, quickly replaced by the certainty that the next test would come, sooner or later, and would be even more relentless. The king-size bed, with its silk sheets and soft pillows, offered no comfort. It was a luxury that suffocated her. Ji-woo lay down, her eyes fixed on the ornate ceiling, feeling the weight of every word spoken, every forced smile, every scrutinizing gaze from the guests. She was an imposter, an actress on a grand stage, and the role was too heavy for her tired shoulders. Sleep did not come easily. Her mind revisited the day's lessons, the artists' names, the rules of etiquette, the complexities of the stock market. It was a deluge of information that threatened to drown her. She missed the smell of soap and bleach, the simplicity of an honest day's work, the warmth of her small home, The next morning brought no relief. The sun had barely risen when Mrs. Choi, punctual as a clock, knocked on the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Lee. Your breakfast will be served in 15 minutes. Mandarin lessons begin at 8, followed by a session with the image consultant to discuss your wardrobe for the next social event." There was no time for mourning, no time for rest. The transformation machine did not stop. Jiwoo went down for breakfast, feeling like an automaton. Every movement was rehearsed, every expression controlled. She barely touched her food, her throat tight. The idea of yet another social event was a knot in her stomach. She didn't have a wardrobe. She had cleaning uniforms. She didn't have an image. She had a tired face and calloused hands. The lessons followed one after another, an incessant bombardment of knowledge. Mandarin, history of the Joseon dynasty, the art of calligraphy, even piano lessons, to cultivate her artistic sensibility, as Mrs. Choi had said. Ji-woo sat, absorbing as much as she could, but feeling increasingly distant from herself. She was a sponge, but the water was salty, and it was corroding her from within. During a brief break, Min Jun appeared, a small hurricane of energy and innocence. He ran to her, arms open, a colorful drawing of a dragon in his hands. "Oma, look what I made at school." Jiwoo felt a genuine warmth, the only real thing in her world of make-believe. She hugged him tightly, inhaling the scent of child and crayon. "It's beautiful, my love, a very strong dragon." Minjun snuggled beside her, his eyes wide and curious. "Oma, aren't you going to clean things anymore? Grandma said you were the best at making everything shine." The innocent question hit Jiwoo like a knife. The smile froze on her lips. She was the best at cleaning, not at being a high society lady. How to explain to a child the charade she was living? "No, my love, now I have a different job here. A very important job." The lie, soft and necessary, weighed on her soul. Minjun, oblivious to her anguish, merely nodded, satisfied, and began to talk about his day. But the seed of guilt had been planted, and Jiwoo felt it germinate. In his office, Lee Jinwoo watched the scene through the cameras. He saw Jiwoo's interaction with Minjun, the forced smile, the hesitation in her voice. He noticed the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she moved, a little slower, a little heavier. But he also saw the resilience, the way she tried to adapt, how she strove to be the Oma Minjun needed. A slight, almost imperceptible glint of approval crossed his cold gaze. She was molding herself, exactly as he had predicted. The pressure was working. In the afternoon, Mrs. Choi brought news of the next event. CEO Lee and Mrs. Lee are invited to the Han Foundation's annual charity gala next Saturday. It is one of the most important events of the season, Mrs. Kim. All influential families will be present. Your presence is crucial. Jiwoo felt the air thin. A charity gala. Not just a business dinner, but an event where she would be expected to interact, to show passion for social causes, to be more than a decorative figure. You will need to familiarize yourself with the causes supported by the Han Foundation. Mrs. Kim, the housekeeper continued, her voice chilling. And of course, your wardrobe will be of extreme importance. The image consultant is already waiting. Jiwoo looked at the pile of books on the Han Foundation, on philanthropy and corporate social responsibility. She, who barely had money for her own needs, would now have to feign passion for millionaire causes. Despair overwhelmed her. She was a puppet, and the strings were being pulled harder every day. The luxury of the mansion seemed like an increasingly smaller cage, the walls closing in on her. The scent of fresh flowers and polished wax, once a symbol of her new life, now smelled of imprisonment. As the image consultant discussed colors and fabrics for the gala, Jiwoo felt a shiver. He spoke of visual impact, of fashion statements. She just wanted to disappear. The image of the woman in the mirror, the Mrs. Lee they were building, was increasingly strange, more distant from the true Kim Ji-woo. She was losing herself, disintegrating under the weight of expectations. The nightmare was not just gaining a new chapter, it was becoming her own reality, and there was no way to wake up. The image consultant, a slender man with thin-rimmed glasses and a professional smile, unfolded fabrics before Ji-woo. Silks, brocades, taffetas, colors she never imagined wearing, cobalt blue, deep emerald, ruby red. Each piece was a work of art, but to Ji-woo, they seemed like elaborate armor. He spoke of silhouette, impeccable fit, power statement. She only saw the cost, the weight, the distance between the woman he described and the woman she truly was. This, Mrs. Kim, is a custom-made gala gown by a Parisian designer. The mermaid cut will elongate your figure, and the pearl and Swarovski crystal embroidery will brilliantly catch the light. Ji-woo observed the dress, an ocean of shimmering midnight blue. It was magnificent, undeniably, but she felt like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes, awkward and out of place. She imagined herself cleaning the mansion floor in that dress. The irony was almost suffocating. "It's beautiful," she managed to say, her voice a whisper. Mrs. Choi, who supervised everything with relentless attention, nodded. CEO Lee approved this design. He believes it will complement your new image. New image. The phrase echoed in her mind. It wasn't a new image. It was an entire persona being built upon the ruins of who she used to be. Every lesson, every etiquette class, every expensive piece of clothing was a brick in this new prison. She tried on the dress, the fabric, cold and heavy, molded to her body, tightening in places she didn't know existed. The mirror returned the image of an elegant, sophisticated, almost unrecognizable woman. Her eyes, however, told a different story. A story of tiredness, fear, and deep loneliness. She felt the air thin, as if the dress was not just clothing, but a second skin that suffocated her. Min-jun, who had peeked through the door, ran to her, his eyes wide. "Oma, you look like a princess." His smile was the only thing that made her feel real. She knelt, with difficulty due to the dress, and hugged him. "Thank you, my love." In that embrace, she felt a flicker of her old life, the simplicity of just being Oma to him, without titles, without expectations. But the dress reminded her that this simplicity was now miles away. Lee Jin-woo, in his office, reviewed the image consultant's reports. Photos of Ji-woo in the gala dress were attached. He studied the image. The transformation was remarkable. The posture, the forced elegance, the eyes that still revealed a remnant of her former vulnerability. She was a blank canvas he was painting, and the work was progressing. An almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. She was becoming the Mrs. Lee he needed. The night of the Han Foundation Gala arrived with the pomp and glamour Ji-woo already expected, but which still shocked her. The Han family mansion was a palace of marble and glass, flooded with the light of crystal chandeliers and the murmur of polite voices. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks as they stepped out of the car. Jin-woo by her side, his hand firm on her elbow. Ji-woo felt like a fish out of water, every movement rehearsed, every smile a mask. The midnight blue dress was stunning, but it seemed to scream imposter to herself. She tried to remember the names of the foundation's benefactors, the causes they supported, the statistics Mrs. Choi had forced her to memorize. It was a labyrinth of information, and she feared getting lost. "Mrs. Lee, what a pleasure to see you again," a mellifluous voice greeted her. It was Mrs. Park, one of the women who had been at the mansion that fateful day, her eyes evaluating Ji-woo from head to toe with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You look different. Blue really suits you." "Bedit." The tone was complimentary, but the intention was clear, a disguised jab, a subtle reminder that she knew where Ji-woo came from. Ji-woo felt a shiver. She knew that Mrs. Park and others like her were watching, waiting for a slip-up. "Thank you, Mrs. Park. You look radiant too," Ji-woo replied, her voice calm, surprising herself with her own composure. She remembered one of Mrs. Choi's lessons. Never show weakness. Keep your head held high and a smile on your face, no matter what happens. Jin-woo beside her didn't miss the exchange. He lightly squeezed her hand, an almost imperceptible sign of approval. He was watching, always watching. The night unfolded in a series of superficial conversations about investments, art, and, of course, the Han Foundation's philanthropy. Ji-woo recited the information she had memorized, speaking about the importance of early childhood education and medical research with a conviction she didn't feel. She was a talented actress, but with every word, she felt a piece of her soul drain away. At one point, one of the foundation's directors, a corpulent man with a paternal smile, approached. "Mrs. Lee, I heard about your deep interest in our initiative to support underprivileged young artists. It's a cause very dear to me. Could you give us your perspective on how we can expand our reach?" Ji-woo's heart pounded. She had read about this, but the information was vague in her mind. She felt Jin-woo's gaze on her, the silent expectation. This was the test. This was the moment she could expose herself. She took a deep breath, remembering her elocution lessons, the importance of speaking with passion. "I believe the key lies in building bridges," she began, her voice gaining confidence. "Many young talents lack access to resources or visibility. We need more robust mentorship programs, perhaps even pop-up galleries in less privileged neighborhoods, so that art can find its audience and artists, their voice. And of course, scholarships that not only cover costs, but also offer emotional and practical support." She spoke with a sincerity that surprised her, channeling her own experience of being invisible, of having unrecognized talents. She wasn't talking about the Han Foundation, she was talking about her own life. The director nodded, impressed. "A very insightful perspective, Mrs. Lee. I see your passion is genuine." Ji-woo felt immense relief. She had passed, not by memorization, but by a flash of her own truth. But the victory was bittersweet. She was using her own pain to build the charade. At the end of the night, exhausted, she found herself in the car with Jin-woo. The silence was heavy. He observed her, his dark eyes impenetrable. "You did well," he said, his voice monotonous. It wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. "Your ability to improvise is remarkable." Ji-woo merely nodded, looking out the window at the passing city lights. She had survived another battle, but the war was far from over. With every step she took towards becoming Mrs. Lee, she felt she was irrevocably moving away from Kim Ji-woo. Luxury was no longer a cage, it was a labyrinth, and she was getting lost within it. The nightmare was becoming her reality, and she no longer knew how to find her way back. The silence of the mansion was a stark contrast to the deafening hum of the gala. Each step on the soft carpets seemed to echo the emptiness Ji-woo felt. The midnight blue dress, once armor, was now an unbearable weight, its pearls and crystals seemingly binding every fiber of her body, suffocating her. She shed it with an almost violent urgency, the fabric slipping to the floor like dead skin. In the mirror, the woman staring back was pale, with deep dark circles, but her eyes still carried the spark of a newly won battle and the shadow of a seemingly endless war. She had passed the test. The words of the Han Foundation director, Jin-woo's silent approval, Mrs. Park's envious gaze. Everything indicated that she had fulfilled her role, once again. But at what cost? Every word she uttered about underprivileged young artists, every phrase about the importance of passion and support, was a double-edged sword. She had spoken with sincerity, yes, but it was the sincerity of her own pain, of her own crushed dreams, used to sustain a charade. She was selling her soul piece by piece to maintain the illusion. That night, she was not Kim Ji-woo, the cleaner with simple dreams and a pure heart. She was Mrs. Lee, the elegant and articulate wife of CEO Lee, a polished and empty figure, molded by the expectations of a man who saw her as a tool. Luxury was no longer a reward, it was a golden cell, and each day the bars became more visible, more palpable. Sleep did not come easily. The images of the gala replayed in her mind, the fake smiles, the calculating glances, the pressure to be perfect. She wondered if there would be an end to this, if one day she would wake up and it would all just be a nightmare, and she would be back in her small home with Min Jun, living a simple but real life. Nostalgia was a sharp, almost physical pain. The next morning, the mansion's routine resumed, relentless. But there was a new tension in the air. Mrs. Choi, with her ever-serious demeanor, seemed to observe her with even greater intensity. CEO Lee was satisfied with your performance at the gala, Mrs. Kim, she said during breakfast, her voice emotionless. However, there are areas that need improvement. Ji-woo felt a shiver. Improvement. What else did they want from her? CEO Lee believes your presence at social events should be more frequent. He wants you to start organizing small charity gatherings here at the mansion to strengthen your image as a hostess and philanthropist. A new challenge, not just participating, but organizing. To be the hostess, the central figure. Ji-woo's heart pounded. She could barely feel comfortable in her own skin. How could she host and entertain Seoul's elite? The idea of having to plan menus, guest lists, decorations, all under the scrutiny of Mrs. Choi, and no doubt Jin-woo, was overwhelming. Mrs. Choi will help you with the details, the housekeeper continued, as if reading her thoughts. The first event will be a charity tea for the Seoul Businesswomen's Association 2 weeks from now. It's an opportunity for you to build your own network of contacts and demonstrate your leadership. Leadership. Ji-woo felt a lump in her throat. She could barely lead herself through that labyrinth of expectations. She looked at Min Jun, who was absorbed in his cereal, oblivious to the new trap being set for his mother. His innocent smile was the only anchor in her distorted reality. Later, as she reviewed guest lists and possible themes for the tea, Ji-woo felt herself sinking. Mrs. Choi was beside her, pointing out flaws in her handwriting, correcting her pronunciation of influential family names. Mrs. Kim, you need to be impeccable. Every detail reflects on CEO Lee and the Han Foundation. The pressure was suffocating. She was being sculpted, polished, transformed into something she was not, and the process was painful. She found herself thinking of her old life, of the simplicity of scrubbing a floor until it shone, of the satisfaction of honest, visible work. Now, her work was invisible, a constant performance that consumed her from within. Jin-woo, as always, watched from afar. He had requested daily reports on Ji-woo's progress. Her photos at the gala, notes on her poise, everything was analyzed with the coldness of a strategist. He saw the transformation, the elegance that emerged, the forced confidence. But he also saw her eyes, the melancholy that persisted, the soul that still resisted complete assimilation. She was a work in progress, and he was satisfied with the pace. But he knew that the real battle was not just external, it was her internal struggle not to lose herself, and that, he knew, would be the hardest to win. Ji-woo felt like a porcelain doll, perfect on the outside but hollow within. Every smile, every word was a layer of paint over the crack growing in her soul. The nightmare was not just gaining a new chapter, it was becoming her own reality, and she no longer knew how to find her way back to Kim Ji-woo. The labyrinth was closing in, and she was losing hope of finding the exit. The announcement of the charity tea for the Seoul Businesswomen's Association hung over Ji-woo like a storm cloud. It wasn't just an event, it was a stage where she would be the main star under society's cruelest spotlights. The mansion, once a strange refuge, now seemed like an operations headquarters, with Mrs. Choi in charge of every detail. And Ji-woo, the reluctant recruit. The following 2 weeks were a blur of lists, menus, floral arrangements, and etiquette lessons. Ji-woo found herself immersed in a universe of fine china, silver cutlery, and the complexity of harmonizing exotic teas with delicate pastries. Mrs. Choi was a relentless taskmaster. Mrs. Kim, Earl Grey tea must be served at a specific temperature, and the petit four must be presented on 3-tiered trays, with colors harmonizing with the hall's decor. Every sentence was an order, every correction, a stab at her already fragile self-esteem. She spent hours studying the guests' profiles, memorizing their names, their affiliations, even their hobbies. Mrs. Choi insisted, "A successful hostess not only receives, she connects. You must be able to initiate a meaningful conversation with each of them, demonstrating genuine interest in their work and passions." Ji-woo felt like a spy, gathering intelligence for an infiltration mission. The authenticity she valued so much was being diluted in a sea of data and rehearsed performances. At night, exhausted, she lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, her mind replayed the day's mistakes, the mispronunciation of a surname, the hesitation in choosing a type of orchid, the lack of grace in holding an imaginary teacup. She remembered the simplicity of her old life, where the biggest concern was whether the floor was clean enough or if Min-jun had eaten all his vegetables. That world now seemed like a distant, almost unbelievable dream. Min-jun was her only solace. In their brief moments together, she tried to forget Mrs. Lee and just be his mother. But even those moments were stolen, fragmented. Once, while he was drawing a sun with crooked rays, she was called to an urgent meeting about the color scheme for the napkins. Guilt gnawed at her. She was losing the essence of motherhood, exchanging it for an empty performance. Jin-woo, as always, was a ghost-like yet omnipresent presence. He received daily reports from Mrs. Choi, detailing Ji-woo's progress, her failures, and her small triumphs. He observed the photos of the arrangements, the revised menus, the tight schedule. One day, he found her in the library, surrounded by books on etiquette and art history. "You are trying hard," he said, his voice a whisper in the silence. "But effort is not enough. Success is the only acceptable outcome." There was no encouragement, only the cold reminder of the gamble she had made. The day of the charity tea arrived with a grey sky and palpable tension. Ji-woo, dressed in a modern hanbok of peach silk, carefully chosen by Mrs. Choi. Every strand of hair was in place, every jewel strategically positioned. In the mirror, she saw Mrs. Lee, an elegant and imposing woman, but her own eyes, behind the mask of perfection, cried out for help. The first guests began to arrive, powerful and influential women with polished smiles and scrutinizing gazes. Ji-woo greeted them at the door, her voice soft and welcoming, her memory working tirelessly to connect names to faces and relevant information. She spoke about the latest trends in finance, about the importance of female leadership, about the Han Foundation's philanthropic projects, all with a fluidity that surprised her. She was a talented actress, yes, but the script was becoming her second nature. At one point, Mrs. Kang, president of the Businesswomen's Association, a woman with grey hair and sharp eyes, approached. "Mrs. Lee, I heard about your recent passion for philanthropy. It is admirable. Tell me, what is your vision for the future of our association? How can we attract the next generation of female leaders?" Ji-woo's heart pounded. This was Mrs. Kang, a legendary figure. She had memorized some points, but the question was direct, personal. She felt the weight of all eyes on her, the silent expectation. She took a deep breath, remembering her own journey, her own struggle to be seen, to have a voice. I believe the key lies in mentorship and visibility. Jiwoo began, her voice gaining strength, not from memorization, but from a sincerity that sprang from her own experience. Many young women have the potential but lack role models and platforms. We need to create programs where today's leaders can guide tomorrow's leaders, not just in business, but also in how to balance career and personal life, how to navigate a world that still has barriers for us. And we need to celebrate their achievements, give them voice and space to innovate. She spoke about the importance of creating a supportive community where women could strengthen each other, overcome challenges, and break glass ceilings. She spoke about the need for scholarship programs that not only provided funding, but also offered an ecosystem of emotional and practical support. She was talking about what she herself desired, what she herself needed. Mrs. Kang listened attentively, a small smile forming on her lips. A very inspiring perspective, Mrs. Lee. I see your passion is genuine and your vision remarkably clear. Jiwoo felt immense relief, but also a tinge of bitterness. She had passed the test, once again. She had used her own truth, her own pain, to build Mrs. Lee. The tea continued, and she floated among the guests, a perfect hostess, praised for her elegance and intelligence. At the end of the afternoon, when the last guest departed and silence returned to the mansion, Jiwoo collapsed into a chair, exhausted. Mrs. Choi approached, her face expressionless. You did well, Mrs. Kim. CEO Lee will be satisfied. Jiwoo merely nodded, feeling the weight of the handbook, the weight of the persona she had embodied. She had survived, yes, but at what cost? Every compliment, every forced smile, every word spoken in the name of Mrs. Lee was a piece of Kim Jiwoo lost in the labyrinth. She was becoming the porcelain doll she so feared, perfect on the outside, but hollow within. The way back seemed increasingly obscure, and hope, a thin thread about to break. The silence that followed the departure of the last guest was heavier than the party's buzz. Jiwoo collapsed into the chair. The peach silk hanbok, once a symbol of her transformation, now felt like a shroud, suffocating her. Mrs. Choi had praised her performance, but the words echoed hollowly. You did well, Mrs. Kim. CEO Lee will be satisfied. Satisfaction, that's what mattered. Not truth, not soul, just the flawless performance. She felt like a puppet whose strings had been masterfully pulled for hours. Every smile, every word about philanthropy and female leadership had been an act. She had used her own pain, her own search for a voice, to construct the image of a strong and inspiring woman, and it had worked. But at what cost? With each compliment, a piece of Kim Jiwoo detached itself, floating away into the labyrinth of that mansion, leaving behind only the polished shell of Mrs. Lee. That night, sleep did not come. She relived every moment, every scrutinizing gaze, every phrase spoken. The image of Mrs. Kang, with her approving smile, should have brought relief, but it only brought a bitter realization. She was becoming too good at this. Too good at being someone else. The line between reality and charade was becoming dangerously thin. She got up and walked to the window, watching the distant lights of Seoul. The world outside seemed so far away, so unattainable. Meanwhile, in his office, Jinwoo reviewed Mrs. Choi's reports. The photos of the event, the guests' comments, the detailed assessment of Jiwoo's performance. A small, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. She had exceeded expectations, the elegance, the poise, the ability to improvise with sincerity. It was all there. The project was progressing at an impressive pace. She was malleable, adaptable, and the pain in her eyes, which he still saw in the discreetly taken photos, was a reminder that she was not yet completely broken. This, somehow, intrigued him. He found himself thinking about her answer regarding true heritage. There was an authenticity in those words, a depth he hadn't expected. She hadn't recited a script. She had spoken from her heart, using truth to protect herself. It was a tactic he, a businessman, respected, but it also unsettled him. He wanted her to become Mrs. Lee, perfect and flawless. But the persistence of Kim Ji-woo, the woman behind the mask, was an element he couldn't control. He called Mrs. Choi. My mother suggested that Mrs. Kim take a more active role in the Han Foundation. There's a charity event in 2 weeks, an art auction for underprivileged children. She would like Mrs. Kim to be the main hostess. The news of the family dinner struck Ji-woo like lightning. CEO Lee's mother is a woman of great influence and tradition, Mrs. Choi explained, her voice cold and formal. She has very high expectations for her son's future wife and grandson's mother. And Mrs. Park and Mrs. Han will be there as special guests. They will be watching your every move. The air in the mansion seemed to thin. Ji-woo felt a shiver. Mrs. Park and Mrs. Han, the women she had defeated because of Min Jun's innocent choice. They would be her cruelest judges, their eyes sharp daggers. This was not a stage for a social performance, but a family court, where her very essence would be put to the test. The lessons intensified. Mrs. Choi instructed her on the history of the Lee family, the matriarch's preferences, the protocols of a formal Korean dinner. The elder Mrs. Lee values discretion, humility, and family devotion. She will observe how you interact with Min Jun, how you conduct yourself at the table, how you answer her questions. Ji-woo spent hours practicing the perfect bow, the correct way to serve tea, the art of respectful but not submissive conversation. Min Jun, oblivious to the storm brewing, was her only ray of sunshine. In one of their rare moments together, he hugged her tightly. "Mommy, are you sad?" he asked, his big, innocent eyes fixed on hers. The question hit Ji-woo like a shock. She tried to smile, but felt her lips tremble. "No, my love. Mommy is just a little tired." Guilt gnawed at her. She was losing herself, and now she feared she was losing the connection with the only person who kept her sane. The night of the dinner arrived. Ji-woo wore a navy blue hanbok, more sober and traditional, chosen by Mrs. Choi to reflect respect and modesty. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, without excessive adornments. In the mirror, she saw a woman who looked completely different from the cleaner she once was. A woman who seemed to belong to that world of wealth and formality. But the emptiness in her chest was an abyss. The guests began to arrive. The elder Mrs. Lee, a woman with an austere demeanor and penetrating eyes, was the first. She greeted Ji-woo with a formal nod, her eyes scanning every detail. Then Mrs. Park and Mrs. Han, both impeccably dressed, with polished smiles that didn't reach their eyes. There was a palpable tension in the air, a silent rivalry that Ji-woo could feel. Dinner proceeded at a slow, calculated pace. Ji-woo served, spoke when questioned, and observed. The elder Mrs. Lee asked questions about Min Jun's education, about Ji-woo's plans for the family's future, about her vision for the Han Foundation. Each answer was carefully pondered, a performance of humility and intelligence. Mrs. Park and Mrs. Han occasionally interjected with subtle comments that seemed designed to undermine Ji-woo's confidence, to remind her of her place. "Mrs. Kim, it's impressive how quickly you've adapted to this new environment," Mrs. Park commented, her sugary tone barely disguising the irony. "It must be quite a challenge, coming from such a different background." Ji-woo felt her blood run cold, but maintained her composure. "It's a constant learning experience, Mrs. Park, but dedication to family and the Han Foundation is a powerful motivation." She looked at Jin-woo, who observed the scene with an unreadable expression, and then at Min Jun, who sat beside her eating in silence. The boy's presence was her armor, her reason. Mrs. Han, with an even sharper smile, added, "Yes, motivation is everything, but true elegance and family heritage are something built over generations, aren't they?" Ji-woo took a deep breath. She couldn't afford to be shaken. "I believe true heritage lies in the values we transmit, Mrs. Han, and in the ability to love and care for those entrusted to us." She looked at Min Jun, and a genuine smile, the first of the night, bloomed on her lips. "Min Jun is my greatest heritage." The elder Mrs. Lee observed the interaction, her eyes fixed on Ji-woo. There was no smile, but a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Jin-woo, for his part, felt a pang of something he couldn't identify. Pride? Surprise? She had used her vulnerability as strength once again. At the end of dinner, when the guests said their goodbyes, the elder Mrs. Lee approached Ji-woo. "You have a strong spirit, Mrs. Kim, but this path is long and full of challenges. I hope you are prepared." Her words were a warning, a promise of more tests. Ji-woo merely bowed deeply, feeling the weight of expectations, of gazes, of unspoken words. She had survived another challenge, but each victory seemed to cost her a larger piece of her soul. The labyrinth was not just closing in, it was becoming her only reality, and the hope of finding her way back to Kim Ji-woo was slipping away, like sand through her fingers. She was Mrs. Lee now, and with each passing day, the mask fused more to her skin. The silence of the mansion after the departure of the elder Mrs. Lee and the other guests was a momentary relief, quickly replaced by a deafening emptiness. Ji-woo remained in the dining room, the navy blue hanbok feeling even heavier, a burden that tied her to that reality. The matriarch's words echoed in her mind. "You have a strong spirit, Mrs. Kim, but this path is long and full of challenges. I hope you are prepared." It was not a compliment, but a solemn warning, a promise of more trials, more layers to be added to her new persona. She felt her hands tremble slightly as Mrs. Choi, with her usual efficiency, supervised the tidying. "You did well, Mrs. Kim." The elder Mrs. Lee seemed intrigued. The word intrigued sounded more like a technical term than a sincere compliment, but Ji-woo felt a slight warmth. It was the closest to approval she expected from Mrs. Choi. That night, sleep continued to be an unattainable luxury. She walked through the silent corridors of the mansion, the city lights through the windows seeming more distant than ever. The image of Min Jun, his innocent smile, was the only thing that prevented her from completely succumbing to despair. He was the reason, the thin thread that connected her to something real, to something worth fighting for. But even that connection was stained by the charade. How could he love a mother who was not who she claimed to be? Meanwhile, in his office, Jin-woo reviewed Mrs. Choi's report. The observations were detailed, almost surgical. Ji-woo's composure under pressure, her ability to deflect the subtle attacks of Mrs. Park and Mrs. Han, her sincere response about Min Jun being her greatest heritage. He noticed his mother's slight nod, a rare gesture of recognition. She was not only adaptable, she was resilient. The pain in her eyes, which he saw in the discreetly taken photos, was a constant reminder that she was not an empty doll, but a woman who fought. And that struggle somehow attracted him. He found himself thinking about her answer regarding true heritage. There was an authenticity in those words, a depth he hadn't expected. She hadn't recited a script. She had spoken from her heart, using truth to protect herself. It was a tactic he, a businessman, respected, but it also unsettled him. He wanted her to become Mrs. Lee, perfect and flawless. But the persistence of Kim Ji-woo, the woman behind the mask, was an element he couldn't control. He called Mrs. Choi. My mother suggested that Mrs. Kim take a more active role in the Han Foundation. There's a charity event in 2 weeks, an art auction for underprivileged children. She would like Mrs. Kim to be the main hostess. The news struck Jiwoo like thunder. Main hostess. That meant speeches, interactions with high society, the press. It wasn't a private tea or a family dinner. It was a public stage where every move would be scrutinized, every word analyzed. Mrs. Choi, with her impassive voice, explained the details. The elder Mrs. Lee sees this as an opportunity for Mrs. Kim to demonstrate her leadership ability and her commitment to the family's values. And of course, Mrs. Park and Mrs. Han will also be present as board members. The air in the mansion seemed to thin again. Mrs. Park and Mrs. Han, always present like lurking shadows, ready to strike. The charity auction was not just a social event. It was a battle arena where her reputation would be forged or destroyed. The lessons intensified, becoming more demanding, more focused on public speaking and event etiquette. Jiwoo spent hours studying the history of the Han Foundation, memorizing names of important donors, practicing speeches. Mrs. Choi instructed her on the perfect posture, the appropriate smile for the cameras, the art of answering tricky questions without revealing too much. Remember, Mrs. Kim, you are the face of the foundation. Your image reflects the Lee family. She felt like an actress, rehearsing for the role of her life, but without a clear script for the ending. With each rehearsal, with each word spoken on behalf of the foundation, she felt Mrs. Lee solidify, while Kim Jiwoo became more ethereal, a distant memory. Min Jun, noticing his mommy's stress, tried to cheer her up with drawings and tight hugs. "Mommy, you're working too hard," he said one day, his brow furrowed. "I want you to rest." Jiwoo's heart ached. She hugged him tightly, feeling his small hand on her back. "I will rest, my love. I promise." But the promise seemed empty. How could she rest when she was constantly on alert, struggling to maintain the charade? Guilt gnawed at her. She was becoming the woman he had chosen, but at what cost to her own soul? The night of the auction arrived. Jiwoo wore a midnight blue silk dress, elegant and discreet, chosen by Mrs. Choi. Her hair was impeccably styled, her makeup subtle. In the mirror, she saw Mrs. Lee, a woman of grace and sophistication, ready to face the world. But behind the polished eyes, the emptiness in her chest was an abyss. The ballroom was filled with Seoul's elite. Lights twinkled in crystal chandeliers. The murmur of conversations filled the air. Jiwoo greeted guests, smiling, shaking hands, reciting the phrases she had rehearsed. She saw Jinwoo watching her from afar, an unreadable expression on his face. And she saw Mrs. Park and Mrs. Han, their polished smiles and evaluating gazes like lurking predators. When it was time for her speech, Jiwoo walked onto the stage, the microphone in her hand feeling strangely heavy. The spotlights blinded her for a moment. She took a deep breath, searching for the voice of Mrs. Lee, the confident and inspiring woman she had become. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice surprisingly firm. "It is an honor to be here today, representing the Han Foundation." She spoke about the importance of charity, about the future of children, about the Lee family's vision. But in the middle of the speech, something changed. She looked at the audience, at the rich and powerful faces, and for an instant, she saw Min Jun, her little Min Jun, in every child she mentioned. The pain, the truth of her own struggle, infused her words. "I believe that true wealth," she said, deviating slightly from the script, "is not in what we possess, but in what we are capable of giving, in the love, in the compassion, in the hope we can offer to the most vulnerable. Each of us has the capacity to be a light in someone's life." There was a silence in the hall. The words were hers, but the emotion was Kim Ji-woo's. She felt the gazes of Jinwoo, of the elder Mrs. Lee, of Mrs. Park and Mrs. Han. They were surprised. She had used her own voice, her own soul once again. At the end of the speech, applause erupted, warmer than she expected. She stepped off the stage, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and a pang of triumph. She had survived, but at what cost? Each time she used her truth to save herself, the line between Kim Ji-woo and Mrs. Lee became more blurred. The labyrinth was not just closing in, it was becoming her only reality. And the hope of finding her way back to Kim Ji-woo was slipping away, like sand through her fingers. She was Mrs. Lee now, and with each passing day, the mask fused more to her skin. The echo of applause still resonated in Ji-woo's ears as she descended from the stage. Each step seemed to lead her deeper into the labyrinth of that new life. The strange mixture of exhaustion and triumph she felt was a bittersweet reminder that although she had survived, with each victory, a larger piece of her soul was consumed. She had spoken from the heart, and that had saved her, but it had also exposed her. The smiles and greetings that awaited her were a tapestry of hidden intentions. Mrs. Choi, with her usual efficiency, was by her side in an instant. "Excellent, Mrs. Kim. Your passion was captivating." The word captivating seemed more like a technical term than a sincere compliment, but Ji-woo felt a slight warmth. It was the closest to approval she expected from Mrs. Choi. Mrs. Park and Mrs. Han, however, wasted no time. Their smiles were like polished blades. "What an emotional speech, Mrs. Kim," Mrs. Park commented, her sugary tone. "It almost made us forget that the Han Foundation is, above all, a family business." Mrs. Han added with a glint in her eyes, "Yes, emotion is a double-edged sword. It can charm, but it can also reveal too much." Ji-woo merely smiled, an impenetrable mask, and thanked them for the compliments, sensing the subtle poison in their words. They had noticed the deviation from the script, the truth that had slipped out. It was then that the elder Mrs. Lee approached, her imposing presence silencing the murmur around them, her eyes deep and perceptive, fixed on Ji-woo. "You touched many hearts today, Mrs. Kim, a rare talent." There was a pause, a charged silence that made Ji-woo hold her breath. But the Lee family does not live by emotions alone. True strength lies in protecting what is ours, and there is something that needs to be protected now. The matriarch made a subtle gesture for Ji-woo to follow her to a more secluded area. Jinwoo, who was watching from afar, exchanged a quick glance with Ji-woo, an unreadable expression on his face. There was something there, perhaps concern, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a silent warning. In the small adjacent sitting room, the elder Mrs. Lee sat down, inviting Ji-woo to do the same. The air was heavy with anticipation. "My late sister, Mrs. Kang Yun-ju, was always an independent soul," the matriarch began, her voice low and controlled. "She holds a significant portion of the shares in the family's technology subsidiary, Hantech. Since my son's death, her relationship with the family has deteriorated. She has isolated herself, and frankly, is causing problems. She refuses to attend board meetings, votes against important proposals, and most worryingly, is considering selling her shares to a competitor." Ji-woo's heart sank. This was not a charity event. It was a family and business crisis. "And what can I do, Mrs. Lee?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mrs. Kang has always been sensitive. She admired my son's wife, her kindness, her grace. She never took well to the idea of Jinwoo remarrying and the other candidates. Well, they didn't impress her. But you, Mrs. Kim, with your story, your resilience, your authenticity, perhaps you can reach her." The matriarch stared directly at her. Your task is to go to Mrs. Kang's house in Jeju, spend a few days there, convince her to reconsider, bring her back to the family, or at least ensure that the Hantech shares remain where they should be. The trip to Jeju, a paradisiacal island, but for Jiwoo, it seemed like exile, a mission that required more than etiquette or rehearsed speeches. It required subtle manipulation, forced empathy, and the ability to unravel family secrets. "I understand, Mrs. Lee," Jiwoo replied, her voice almost a whisper. "You will depart tomorrow morning." The matriarch concluded, her decision final. "Mrs. Choi will arrange everything. And remember, Mrs. Kim, the future of Hantech and our family's reputation depend on your success." Back in the main hall, Jinwoo intercepted her. "Jeju, Mrs. Kim. A new challenge, it seems." His tone was neutral, but his eyes revealed intense curiosity. "It seems so, Mr. Lee," Jiwoo replied, feeling a lump in her throat. "Your aunt, Mrs. Kang Yun-ju." Jinwoo frowned slightly. "My aunt is difficult. She has a good heart, but she's stubborn and distrustful, especially of strangers, and of anyone who approaches the family with ulterior motives." He looked her in the eyes, and for a brief moment, the barrier between them seemed to break. "Be careful, Mrs. Kim. She can be more dangerous than Mrs. Park and Mrs. Han combined." That warning, coming from Jinwoo, hit her hard. He wasn't just observing. He was, in some way, warning her. But why? That night, sleep was more unattainable than ever. The image of Mrs. Kang Yun-ju, an unknown woman, yet with the power to destroy the fragile peace Jiwoo had built, haunted her thoughts. She researched everything she could about Mrs. Kang, her history, her hobbies, her known grievances. Every detail was a piece of a puzzle she needed to assemble to survive. Min-jun, sensing his mommy's tension, hugged her tighter before bed. "Mommy, don't be sad. I love you." His words were a balm, but also a knife. How could she continue this charade, knowing she was sinking deeper into a swamp of lies and manipulations? The next morning found her on the Lee family's private jet, en route to Jeju. The island's turquoise sea seemed like an invitation to peace, but Jiwoo felt only the storm brewing within her. Mrs. Choi had given her a complete dossier on Mrs. Kang, but Jinwoo's words echoed in her mind. She can be more dangerous than Mrs. Park and Mrs. Han combined. Upon arriving at Mrs. Kang's residence, a traditional Korean house nestled among lush gardens, Jiwoo took a deep breath. The door opened, revealing a middle-aged woman with penetrating eyes and an expression that revealed nothing. "You must be Mrs. Kim," Mrs. Kang said, her voice surprisingly soft, but with an edge of steel. "Come in. I was expecting you. The elder Mrs. Lee always sends her newest pawns to do the dirty work." The reception was not a welcome. It was a declaration of war. Jiwoo knew she was treading on a minefield. The labyrinth was not just closing in, it was becoming her only reality, and the hope of finding her way back to Kim Jiwoo was slipping away like sand through her fingers. She was Mrs. Lee now, and with each passing day, the mask fused more to her skin, making it almost impossible to remove. The dark wooden door closed behind Jiwoo with a soft thud, but it resonated like thunder in her ears. She was inside. The air in Mrs. Kang's house was different from that of the Lee mansion, denser perhaps with the scent of old incense and herbal tea, and a quietness that seemed to observe her every move. Mrs. Kang Yun-ju, with her penetrating eyes and an expression that seemed carved from stone, offered neither a smile nor a welcoming gesture. Only an evaluative gaze that stripped her of her expensive clothes and exposed her essence. "Sit down, Mrs. Kim." Mrs. Kang indicated a seat at a low table in the living room where a teapot steamed. Her voice, though soft, carried unquestionable authority, like the whisper of a steel chain. "I imagine the elder Mrs. Lee has already given you all your instructions. She has always been very thorough. Ji-woo sat, her back straight, her hands clasped in her lap. Every fiber of her being was on high alert. Jin-woo had warned her Mrs. Kang was dangerous, and she already felt the weight of that truth. She informed me about the Han-Tech situation, Mrs. Kang, Ji-woo began, choosing her words carefully, and about the importance of your vision for the company's future. Mrs. Kang let out a short, humorless laugh. My vision? Mrs. Lee only cares about my vision when it threatens her profits. Make no mistake, Mrs. Kim. You are not here to discuss visions. You are here to convince me not to sell my shares to the competition, to bring me back to the fold. The direct attack caught Ji-woo by surprise, but she didn't let it show. I understand there are family tensions, Mrs. Kang, but I believe the Lee family and Han-Tech are stronger when united. United. Mrs. Kang poured the tea, steam rising in spirals. United under my sister's iron fist, perhaps. Do you know what happened to my nephew, Jin-woo's brother? Ji-woo's heart skipped a beat. She knew. The death of the elder Mrs. Lee's eldest son, the husband of the woman she was impersonating. It was a minefield. I was informed about the tragedy, Ji-woo replied, her voice almost a whisper. Tragedy, Mrs. Kang repeated, the word laden with bitterness. He was a good man, kind, and my sister crushed him with her expectations, with the pressure of the company. And when he was gone, she didn't cry for him. She cried for the loss of the perfect heir. And now she wants Jin-woo to follow the same path. And you, Mrs. Kim, are the new piece in this game. The accusation hit Ji-woo like a blow. She was a piece, a tool, and Mrs. Kang saw it with crystal clarity. I am not a piece, Mrs. Kang, Ji-woo said, her voice gaining a firmness that surprised her. It was the voice of Kim Ji-woo, the woman who had fought for her life and her sons. I am a mother, and I understand the pain of loss, the importance of family. Mrs. Kang studied her, a glint of curiosity, or perhaps skepticism, in her eyes. A mother, yes. The elder Mrs. Lee made sure to emphasize your story. The resilient widow, the dedicated mother. A touching story, Mrs. Kim, almost perfect for the role you've been assigned. Ji-woo felt a shiver. Mrs. Kang was not just distrustful. She was analyzing every detail, looking for the flaw in the facade. My story is mine, Mrs. Kang. It's not a role, Ji-woo insisted, genuine emotion beginning to seep into her words. She thought of Min-jun, of the reason why she was there, enduring all of this. The pain I felt, the love I have for my son, that is real. Mrs. Kang picked up her teacup, her eyes never leaving Ji-woo's. Reality and perception are different things in the Lee family. My sister is a master at shaping perception. She chose you for your authenticity, didn't she? Because you are different from the other women she tried to push on Jin-woo. The others were predictable. You, Mrs. Kim, are an unknown, and that makes you interesting and dangerous. The word dangerous echoed in Ji-woo's mind. Was she dangerous to Mrs. Kang, or did Mrs. Kang see her as a threat to her own game? I have no intention of being dangerous, Mrs. Kang, only to help build bridges, to heal wounds, Ji-woo tried, knowing her words sounded hollow in the context of that house. Bridges, wounds? Mrs. Kang laughed again, a dry sound. You are naive, Mrs. Kim, or a very good actress. The Lee family doesn't heal wounds. It hides them under Persian rugs and ignores them until they rot. The only bridge my sister wants to build is one that leads directly to my control over Han-Tech. The conversation was a battle of wills, a dangerous dance where every step could lead to an abyss. Ji-woo realized that Mrs. Kang was not just a bitter woman, she was a strategist, as sharp as the elder Mrs. Lee, but with a layer of vulnerability and resentment that made her unpredictable. Perhaps I am naive, Mrs. Kang, Ji-woo admitted, changing tactics, but I believe that even in the most powerful families there is room for truth and for forgiveness, and to protect the legacy of someone who is gone. The mention of her nephew seemed to hit a nerve. Mrs. Kang tightened her grip on the teacup, her eyes momentarily darting to a framed photograph on the shelf, a smiling young man with a sparkle in his eyes that reminded Ji-woo of Jin-woo. "Legacy," Mrs. Kang murmured, her voice losing some of its harshness. "His legacy was destroyed by ambition, and now my sister wants to destroy mine. She wants me to be a shadow, a silenced voice. But I will not be." Ji-woo felt a small opening. It wasn't about the Hantech shares, not just about that. It was about respect, about being heard, about the memory of a lost son. What if there was a way to honor his memory, Mrs. Kang? To ensure your voice is heard, not just at Hantech, but within the family, Ji-woo proposed, taking a risk. Perhaps you don't need to sell the shares to prove your point. Perhaps there's another way to show your strength, to protect what's yours, without destroying what he helped build. Mrs. Kang stared at her for a long moment, her eyes evaluating the sincerity behind the words. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. Ji-woo knew she was on a precipice. One false step, and everything would be lost.